Friends, how are you? I hope you're all okay. My name is Kel Spellman. I am an actor, a presenter, and a very proud ambassador for WWF. And I would like to welcome you to Call of the Wild. This is a brand new podcast from WWF, all about how each and every one of us can make a difference in the fight to save our planet. Each episode, we're going to be joined by different experts and famous faces as we delve into particular areas of the climate conversation and find out those ways in which we can all chip in and make a difference. And to kick the series off, there is only one man we could begin with. We are joined by a very special guest.
We are part of the natural world. We certainly have responsibility for it because now we are so powerful that we can destroy it. And what's worse is that we do. And if we damage the natural world, we are damaging ourselves. And we have been doing that without care for decades.
Oh, yes, my friends. You heard that right. And is it just me, or does his voice sound even better through headphones? Maybe it's just me. But that voice there you heard is the one and only Sir David Attenborough. And he needs all of our help to do our bit for the planet. So, it's time to step up. The wild is calling. It's time to act. Is there a moment that kind of just brought you pure joy and elation? Maybe even one that wasn't captured on camera that we might not know about?
Lots of those, lots of them. And the great moments come when you have a vision of the natural world in which humanity doesn't play a part, in which there's a whole complex of organisms all interacting with one another, all busy about their own affairs, all at peace with the world. I remember just such a moment in northern Australia, in a billabong, those big shallow lakes. We had put up a hide the previous night, and then we'd gone in there and sitting in there before dawn while it was still dark so that the birds didn't see us. And then you look through this little peephole in the side of the hide, and there were, 10,000 egrets and cockatoos and crocodiles and the ducks and geese, and the whole thing busy squawking away, busy feeding, and birds you've never seen of before, and just thrilling. And we filmed for quite a bit, and then something happened, you don't know what, because suddenly the entire flock took fright and flew off. And there was the billabong, empty of life altogether, and just ripples still of where they'd all been flying away.
I would really love to hear kind of any top tips you'd have to impart to our listeners and to young people on what they can do to turn things around and make that change.
Well, one of the simplest things that you should do if you get the chance, when you get the chance, is just actually to stop. Sit down. Don't move. Keep quiet. Wait. 10 minutes. You'll be very surprised if something pretty interesting didn't happen within 10 minutes. You're doing that in a woodland. If you haven't done it, it's extraordinary. Don't get too impatient either. And then, speaking for myself, then you realise how ignorant you are. Yeah. How you can't actually recognise what that bird call is, which you ought to be able to. I certainly ought to be able to, and I can't. Mind you, I can't hear either, at my age. But nonetheless, there are things to see, and there are wonderful things to see, and extraordinary things happen. And I mean, of course, the real time when it really is exciting to do that, if you do it into a place where you don't know at all. I mean, you go into a jungle in the middle of Costa Rica or something, and then you suddenly see extraordinary things which you really don't know anything about.
What signs have you seen and examples that tell us it's not the end of the world, that there is hope?
Well, that is how things recover. And the natural world is fantastic in the way its abilities to regenerate are extraordinary. 40, 50 years ago, there was a real chance that whales might be exterminated because we had such powerful ways of killing them, of finding the poor things and then shooting explosive harpoons into them and killing them. And we were doing it hand over fist. And nations were competing to see how many they killed, until suddenly someone, or a number of people, were saying, if we don't stop this, there will be no more whales in the sea. And then everybody will lost of everything. And they got the sea, the whaling nations of the world, the maritime nations of the world together, and got them together and got them to bang their heads. No, they didn't bang their heads together, but they got them to agree that they would stop whaling. And now there are more whales than there have been in the sea for a century.
People power.
People power, yeah, but also the fantastic powerful regeneration that nature has. And we're learning more about the great whales and the way they communicate and so on. And there are sites now that haven't been seen in whales, accumulating in numbers that haven't been seen for a century.
Is there any moment that really stands out to you that kind of highlights just the situation that we're in and that really kind of, has sat with you?
I did one particular dive in the Western Pacific a couple of years ago, and what should have been an absolutely perfect coral reef just looked like an underwater rubbish tip. And swimming along the length of this big ghost net, which had accumulated over the top of the corals and was killing off the coral, about 90% of corals that come into permanent contact with plastics will be killed off by it. So you'd swim along and you'd see a trumpet fish that was entangled and couldn't swim free, and alongside it, hanging outside of the ghost net, was its mate, and it was just there waiting for its dying mate. And then I swam on another metre, and there's a scorpion fish entangled in the net, and alongside it was its mate. And then the further you get on, you find entangled turtles whose days are numbered, sharks that are entangled in endless fishing lines, and it's the most graphic visualization of what we are doing to our planet and the things that we are so emotionally dependent on. Particularly in these dark times, so many people have looked to nature to be their positivity and to give them hope. And to see the nature that we are only now starting to realise can give us so much, to see it so utterly denuded by us as a species, just brings me great sadness and makes me think, what are we doing? What are we doing that, now more than any other time in history, we understand the problems, we understand what we're doing, we understand what the end game will be, and yet we continue to do these negative things anyway. We should be better than that.
Forever, I've loved animals like my whole life. My mum, when I was little, she would say, never trust a man who doesn't like dogs.
Never a true word
I'm
said.
like, yeah, literally. We just always have been big animal lovers. And when I think of my childhood, it was just all outdoors, just in the garden, looking for frogs. I had a frog jump on my face once and his foot went in my mouth.
Oof, how was that?
It was alarming. It was alarming. But, it didn't turn me off to frogs.
But Kedar for yourself, and I should say as well, I've known Kedar for years. We went to school together, so he is one of my nearest and dearest. But your relationship with the natural world, I found, has grown tenfold because, you're now involved in WWF's Youth Ambassador Programme. I know we've also sat on some panels together, but where did your relationship for the natural world begin, Kedar?
I guess as well, like Tanya, there was an upbringing around animals. But the heritage that I am, there's always been, whenever I go to the Caribbean, that feeling of just wildlife and just the terrain of that area just really connect to something for me. And I think the older you get, you kind of come to terms with how important that is. It started off with the diet, I think. About 4 or 5 years ago, I was kind of just reevaluating things and just kind of looking at habits and just looking at, the way that I am and the way that things are. And then there was, I think I came across by this guy called Dr. Sebi, who kind of talks about veganism, but just heard about the health benefits from it really. And then just kind of just reevaluating that, kind of figured out how weird it was that I was just kind of eating all these things that kind of weren't necessarily for me and also just had repercussions that were bigger than me and that had more to do with just the pleasure of that moment. And it's just kind of been a journey ever since.
I think as I started to travel the world through my work, I started to see more nature and really develop an appreciation of nature. And there was one particular moment, I was traveling in Japan for a month when I was 16, and I'd been asked to meet mountain worshippers in the north, in these very kind of, I guess, holy mountains where many people pilgrim every year. And I remember the morning that I was going to meet the mountain worshipper, sort of laughing at the idea internally, and just thinking what a ridiculous idea to, worship mountains. And then after a day of listening to him, but also of being in these incredible mountains and like being amongst these like 1,000-year-old giant trees, and the landscape really moved me. And suddenly, like by the end of the day, mountain worshipping made so much sense. And then alongside that, I realized that every other social issue or animal issue that I might care about would be made worse by an unhealthy environment. It was like, how can we not be freaking out about this? It's the only planet we have, and if the scientists are warning us that we're using it and abusing it in an unsustainable way, then we need to deal with that.
We're focusing on the fashion world in this episode, and of course, Lily, that is a world that you know very well. I mean, you've worked with the likes of Rimmel, Alexander McQueen, Love, Chanel, just to name a few. When did you start to realise about the impact the fashion industry as a whole was having on our climate and environment?
My career kind of really took off when I was 15. And it was all very fast and exciting, and yeah, I didn't question it much. I think I was kind of aware of the problems in fashion only so much as I started to say no to wearing fur, because that was an obvious one. And I thought of sweatshop labor, because sweatshop labor had had a lot of media attention. And I'd never considered what the steps are before you get to a sweatshop. And so the simplicity of reading about farmers who are making cotton production just opened my eyes to the fact that there's a whole chain of people and environmental impacts behind each product we make and we use. I felt a kind of double responsibility because I was modeling that I wasn't just buying products. I was essentially persuading other people to buy products. And so, yeah, it felt conflicted and also very curious to learn more. And so I started to become more interested in what a social business can look like, what fair trade can look like, and started to work with companies like The Body Shop who are trying to produce things in a better way.
I grew up in a reindeer herding family. It's been in my family for centuries. Reindeer herding is a big part of not only my life, but my whole family's life. First of all, the reindeer it's an Arctic animal. During the winter, this reindeer is down at the mountains and gathering foods and stuff because there's more food down in the forest. But when it gets warmer and the snow starting to melt, they move up the mountain because they want to get relief from the heat, because in the forest it's much more warmer on the treeless parts of the mountain. And we can actually see a difference in moving patterns with it because of the seasons changing, because of climate change. We see that the reindeer, when it moves up the mountain or down the mountain, it's changing. So now, because our lives revolve around the reindeer, it's harder for us to kind of plan out when we're, for example, during the summer, we gather the reindeers and we mark the reindeer calves. And we usually do this in the summer around the beginning of July. But now we don't really know with as much certainty as we did before when it's going to be, because of the seasons changing, because of climate change. So for most of the reindeer herders, we have different jobs and we do different things, because having reindeer herding as a sole income is really hard today. So when we're marking the reindeer calves, we have to take time off work, and that usually is something that you have to say months in advance when you're going to have time off. But because we don't really know before a week in advance when we're going to mark the reindeer calves, we can't do that. The reindeer calves are born in the spring, in around May, beginning of June. And because of last year, it was really, really cold in May. A lot of reindeer calves didn't make it. A lot of them died because it was so cold. And I felt quite down last year because I had a significant amount of less reindeer calves than I usually do. The changes I would like to see, first of all, the biggest one is that people actually start taking climate change seriously. It's something that's happening now and affecting me as a person now. I hear a lot of people talk about it like it's a future problem, but it's not. And then one of the other things that's really important in Sweden is so ridiculous that it's like 2021, but we still haven't gotten our rights as an indigenous people in Sweden. The message I would like everyone to listen to is listen to indigenous people. We have lived with nature for thousands of years, and we are the natural caretakers of the land. We know it like no other people do. And we are so deeply connected to the nature that if nature is hurting, so are we as a people.